Hello, I'm Czardus, and this is the Chicago History Project. In today's video, we are going to build the original Fort Dearborn and the earliest American settlement while discussing the city's history during the 18th century. We left off last episode as the Wee and then the Potawatomi were settling in the region, with two large settlements, each with at least 150 homes. This episode explores the role that Jesuit priests, fur traders, and other individuals played in the earliest settlements at Chicago. First, we have Louis Joliet. Joliet was born in 1645 in Beaupré, a French settlement near Quebec City, the center of the fur trade. Joliet's stepfather owned land on an island in the St. Lawrence River in Quebec that was home to many First Nations. Joliet spent a lot of time on the island, likely learning the indigenous languages of the Americas at a young age. In 1667, he abandoned plans to become a priest to pursue fur trading instead. A year earlier, Jacques Marquette, a Jesuit priest, arrived in Quebec from France, where he met Joliet. 2 years later, Marquette's superiors persuaded him to pursue missions in the western Great Lakes region. He helped found the missions at Sault Ste. Marie, St. Ignace, and La Pointe. At La Pointe, he encountered members of the Illinois tribes who told him about the important trading route of the Mississippi River. They invited him to their settlements, which were mostly farther south. As war broke out among nearby tribes, Marquette left La Pointe and went to the Straits of Mackinac, where he informed his superiors about the rumored river and requested permission to explore it. In 1673, Joliet and Marquette joined together to form an expedition of 7 to explore the famed Mississippi River. They traveled by canoe across Lake Michigan through Green Bay, down the Fox River, then across a land portage in Wisconsin, and finally south on the Mississippi River. They traveled as far south as they could before encountering tribes with European trinkets, which prompted them to return north out of fear of running into the Spanish in the south. On the way back north, Native Americans told them about the Chicago Portage, a faster route back to the Great Lakes. In taking this route, Joliet and Marquette became the first Europeans to travel across the Chicago region. Marquette later returned to winter in the Chicago area in 1674 as a guest of the Illinois Confederation. Next came René Robert Cavalier, Sieur de La Salle, who is commonly known as Robert La Salle. La Salle was another Jesuit priest turned explorer who has a Chicago street named after him, along with a statue in his honor. La Salle became the first European explorer to canoe the entire length of the Mississippi as part of his expedition in 1679. So while his time in Chicago is limited, the city continues to hold him in high esteem. Then, in 1696, Father Francois Pinet, yet another Jesuit priest, founded the Mission of the Guardian Angel in Chicago. We don't know the exact location of the mission, but we do know that the purpose of the mission was to convert Native Americans who had settled in the area to Christianity, and so now we've caught back up to where we left off last episode. Father Pinet spoke the Miami language so fluently that while in Chicago he wrote the first Miami to French dictionary, which was the very first book to be written in Chicago. The mission only stayed open for a few years and has since been lost to history. Around the same time, the Wee exited the area, moving to the Wabash River Valley, and the Potawatomi moved into the area instead. The Potawatomi were part of the Council of Three Fires, a centuries-old alliance along with the Ojibwa and Ottawa. The Potawatomi became very adept at farming the land, using a patchwork field system or a wheel system. This is very significant because when more Americans eventually began to settle in the area, they could see from the Potawatomi farms that the land was very fertile. Unfortunately, many American history books make it seem as though the land was locked until John Deere invented the polished steel plow, but the truth is the American settlers found land that was already being worked, which increased its appeal to them. The Potawatomis became more established in the region than any other previous groups and developed close ties to the French traders. This led to a growing number of Métis, or people of mixed ancestry of both French and Native American. Gradually, the name of the region changed from Chicagua to Chicago. By the mid-18th century, relations between the European powers had deteriorated, resulting in a major conflict known as the 7 Years' War, with Britain and France on opposite sides. Given the Potawatomi's strong ties to the French traders, it made sense for them to side with the French. While there wasn't any significant fighting in the Chicago area, the war had a major impact on the region when the 1763 Treaty of Paris resulted in the French surrendering all of their claims in North America. Of course, not long after that came the American Revolutionary War, after which the Chicago region switched hands again, at least in the eyes of the European and American settlers. Chicago is now part of the United States Northwest Territory. Around the same time, a trader named Guarie settled briefly in the region, though not much is known about him. What we do know is that there were traces of a cornfield along the north branch of the Chicago River. There are anecdotal references in later writings about Guarie living there as early as 1778, and as late as 1823, the north branch was called by some the River Guarie. There isn't any hard evidence to support the legend of Guarie, and I imagine that the story of Guarie really got started by some old guy in the 1850s claiming they heard about him when they were kids. In the late 18th century, a group of Métis people were beginning to settle at the mouth of the Chicago River. This included Jean-Baptiste Pointe DuSable, who is regarded as the founder of Chicago. DuSable was of African descent, described as handsome and well-educated. DuSable married a Native American woman, Kittiwaha, and they had 2 children. DuSable is first recorded as living at the mouth of the Chicago River in a trader's journal of early 1790. By then, he had established an extensive and prosperous trading settlement in what later became the city of Chicago. Settling near DuSable was Antoine Wilmette, a Métis fur trader who settled just to the west of DuSable in 1790. A few years later, he married Archange Marie Chevalier, another Métis who was the daughter of a Potawatomi chief. Several of her sisters married other fur traders who eventually became prominent names in the early years of Illinois. DuSable sold his home in 1800 and moved away. Jean Lalime, a Métis fur trader from Quebec who arrived in the Chicago area in 1792, purchased the home and served as an agent for William Burnett of Canada. Other early settlers before 1800 included Francois and Marie-Therese Lemay, Louis and Angelique Peddle, and Sergeant James Lee, who operated a cattle ranch along the south branch of the river. Individual settlers were not the only ones recognizing the strategic benefits of Chicago. In 1803, the U.S. Army established Fort Dearborn on Lake Michigan, a right which they negotiated with Native Americans in the Treaty of Greenville in 1795. It was constructed by troops under Captain John Whistler and named in honor of Henry Dearborn, then United States Secretary of War. The U.S. completed the fort a year later with a double stockade and 2 blockhouses. As part of the fort, the U.S. government established what it called a factory, a trading post intended to offer goods for sale cheaply to Native Americans in exchange for furs, with the intent of keeping furs away from the British while working to better relations with the tribes. Lalime was fluent in several languages and was quickly hired to be an interpreter both for Captain Whistler and for the operators of the factory, Charles Jesuit and later Matthew Irwin. Once the fort was built, more settlers began to arrive in the region, leading to interpersonal conflict, and tensions rose between the U.S., Native Americans, and the British, which would ultimately culminate in the War of 1812, but we'll get more into that next week. If you've liked this video, please leave a comment or consider becoming a Patreon supporter. With your support, I hope the project will end up being great. Also, be sure to click to watch the video on the screen now. I'm sure you'll enjoy it too.